आपने देखा होगा अच्छे अच्छे लोगों के चेहरे पर से चमक चली गई।
आप लोग सब कुछ जानते हो और आप लोग कभी जिंदगी में गलती नहीं करते हो। सत्ता का खेल तो चलेगा, सरकारें आएंगी जाएंगी, पार्टियां बनेगी बिगड़ेंगी, मगर ये देश रहना चाहिए। इस देश का लोकतंत्र मत रहना चाहिए।
Good afternoon to everybody. We are extremely thankful for all of you taking out the time to be with us to give your perspective on things, because these are some of the best people that we know that can really put forth views, and the views are really of high quality and extremely important for other people to know. We have Rohan Pathak sir, we have Shivam Pandey sir, we have Daksh Dhawan sir, and we have Shrestha Garge ma'am. Here the structure would be that all the speakers will get a total of about 6 minutes to keep their points, and 1 minute of opening statements, which is a protected minute. That is, nobody will ask questions or will rebut or will try to substantiate those points put forth in the first minute. Next, the 2 minutes are allowed to conclude the points after everybody's speech is over. So they can either tell us that the 2 minutes for conclusion they are trying to utilize now, or they will be given those 2 minutes at the end of their time. The discussion will go for about 25 minutes, and which can be exceeded to about 30 minutes. So let's get started with the discussion. I would like to ask Shivam Pandey sir to come first.
So, guys, as today's the topic that you guys have decided, if Manonit, you could repeat that topic for the benefit of entire people present here, that would be great.
Sure, sir. The topic is: are extrajudicial killings sanctioned by the government, and do they challenge the judiciary's authority?
Now, if I was to really go ahead and try to understand this entire statement, firstly, this statement I see talks about one, extrajudicial killings that are sanctioned by the government, and two, it tells us whether this particular thing is supposed to be viable for a particular society which has been set or not. So basically, we could say that I could reasonably presume that the entire discussion is going to take place in and around this particular area, this particular ambit. So I'd like to start off by firstly saying that the moment we think about something like an extrajudicial killing, that itself tells you that how derogatory the entire system could be with regards to, if you compare it to the law. Because something that is extrajudicial in itself tells you that it has gone beyond the ambit of the law. It has gone beyond the purview and the basics. So why do we really have law in the first place in a particular society? People come together and they form a society and they form a law because they say that law is that basic level of human depravity to which every single human being is supposed to adhere to. Every single human being is supposed to adhere to a certain basic level of human depravity. And that basic level of depravity is what we avail out of a systematic format, a system of law, or called the legal system. Now, in order to enforce this legal system, we have the judicial system. The judicial system goes ahead and tries to enforce this particular legal system. Because if there is no judiciary, the legal system is merely left on the paper, isn't it? That's just meant for, that it will be left only for the paper. In practice, we can only have law so long as we have the right to actually enforce this particular law. And this enforcement and manifestation of the enforcement comes from the judicial system. So the moment there's an extrajudicial word attached to anything, something as big as a killing, that itself tells you that it goes beyond what the judiciary stands for, it goes beyond what the entire legal system has come up for, and it tells you that how this is actually nothing but just a systematic failure that we're talking about. So if you're really looking at two sides of this particular coin, the only other side that I can see is a systematic failure.
Right, sir. I would like to ask Rohan sir to bring the discussion forward. You're not right.
Like, so what Shivam said actually laid the base of the whole discussion over here, right? Because at some point of time we need to understand that there is judiciary to function in a particular manner, and only then some laws. That is the reason why judiciary is made up finally. But the other aspect is also something we need to understand. What we need to understand is, are there certain loopholes when we talk about judicial proceeding, or are there certain loopholes in the law where people actually get this benefit of attempting extrajudicial killings, right? For example, if there is a loophole in a particular law, if there is a loophole in IPC or if a procedural code like CRPC, do these loopholes also play important roles to promote such extrajudicial killings at one point of time, right? The second thing we need to understand is that why these killings also take place. Like, why do these things happen? Right? When we talk about, as the whole discussion topic tells us, that whether this is state sanctioned or not, we need to understand that the extrajudicial killings are done by the state officers, right? The police officers, in if we go directly, and by the police officers themselves. Now, by whom, by under whose protection, or by under whose umbrella do they try to do all these things? Is also one question we need to answer over here. Okay, another point is that, is there a failure in the procedure of judiciary? Is because, for example, if I am a police personnel, right? I live, or if Manoj, me and you both are police personnel, went on to arrest somebody. We almost died over there to arrest that particular person, but we arrested him somehow, didn't even harm him, but we just arrested him some in the other manner. Now he gets bail in the during the procedure of the trial itself. Now, what about that, right? Because ultimately, the police personnel who tried arresting such a big person who was not at all traceable, for example, can now actually be a very much harm to not only to him but to his family as well, right? So these are a number of aspects you need to understand when such people go and arrest all these people, right? All these such kind of people. And under Section 100 of the IPC allows you to actually go on and in self-defense, you can go on and act in certain manners, in certain ways, and act grievously as well, right? And under section 300,
So,
and yeah,
I will have to cut you off. The
yeah,
introductory statements are over. And Shrestha Garge ma'am, do you have anything to say for the last two speakers?
Both of them have laid basis for both sides of the coin that we're talking about today. We need to understand that historically there had been a finality in the sense of proclamation of whether a person was a criminal or not. So there was never the idea of an alleged criminal, historically speaking. But then as we evolved our legal systems, there has come up this idea of a criminal not being a criminal per se, but then an alleged criminal till he has been proven guilty. But then we have seen both sides of how this practically pans out and how principally we intended it to pan out. That we wanted to give basic human rights and an opportunity for any person to prove that he has not done a thing that is not legally allowed for him to do. Now we need to understand that, and principally now that we're talking about the fact that bottom line nothing is right or wrong, we need to understand how practically these provisions or these societal emotions with regard to extrajudicial killings is going to pan out practically, and which whether one side or the other side is going to be beneficial for us in the future. When Shivam sir comes here and tells us that extrajudicial killing in itself is outside the ambit of law, that is not true because it's extrajudicial. We need to understand that an economy or a country functions not only on the basis of how the judiciary functions or what the judiciary thinks is right or wrong, but on a very dynamic concept of how the society perceives an act that is supposed to be legal or illegal, and how the other three pillars of what makes up a country, the other three pillars, mainly executive and the legislature and the media, decide or discuss about whether a particular legality that has been established by the judiciary in the first place is right or not. So we need to understand that judiciary in itself does not have an upper hand over deciding whether a thing is legal or not legal, as we've seen in many cases, because judicial pronouncements and precedents are also overturned by the judiciary itself. In this regard, we need to understand that whatever is prevalent, whatever sections or I wouldn't say loopholes, but whatever.
Sorry, ma'am,
I
will have
conclude in
to.
one
Sure.
sentence. I'll conclude. Whatever sections or legalities are available to us, whether they can be put to work in the literal sense, or do we need to interpret into them in order to have a more practical approach to this problem?
Daksh sir, do you have anything to say for the last three speakers? And please put forth your own points.
Greetings everyone, glad to be here and thanks for this opportunity. glad that I'm able to present my case with such honorable panelists as well as the moderator. I believe that, okay, sir, given the basis that all the other three speakers have put forth, I think the most important thing that we need to understand over here is the concept of separation of power. The concept of separation of power, which came in the late 1700s by the doctrine which Montesquieu gave, had a very strict sense of and a strict understanding of what separation of power here is. Now, the thing that we follow in India follows a pseudo separation of power, if you would call it, because we're not following it in the strict sense. We have judiciary, we have executive, and we have the parliament. The parliament makes the laws, which gives the enforcement to the executive to take those actions out. And even though Ms. Shrestha put forward the claim that the judiciary is not above executive and parliament, but in my opinion, all the enforcement that the executive is supposed to, the scrutinizing factor out of all the three separation of power bodies is eventually judiciary. That is why you can also say that judiciary is a so-called a bully, in a sense that it bullies over the executive and the parliament. Now, the reason why I say this is because sometimes you need to understand that the power that the executive hold, which in respect right now to this discussion we're talking about police, there's some kind of problems that police also, the executive has to also face in event of a failure of first the parliament coming up with laws which have a strict consequence or a sense of detachment from all these crimes that they have put forth in their law, so that it disencourages people to not get involved in it. At the same time, judiciary fails to understand the points of taking in evidence and the infinite amount of you can call corruption in both the parliament and the parliament and judiciary. Now, because of this, I think the executive are stuck in a slippery slope. And the slippery slope is that either they can kill people in encounters and face the consequences which might there be by the judiciary. Also, another thing to put into perspective is that there's no actual database which has the number of which numbers the scrutinizing power that the judiciary have had any forceful killings that done by the police. There's no count of it.
So, thank you for all of your introductory remarks. Now, what Daksh sir said was that there is a certain separation of power, and there is corruption, and there is delay in judiciary, and that I find is actually really the opposite of what Rohan sir said. So, I would like to have Rohan sir's remarks on this.
See, when I said that there are certain loopholes in the law or in the judicial process itself, the loopholes can mean anything, right? The loopholes can be procedural, or the loopholes can be something which is under the table kind of thing, right? So these loopholes are needed to be checked or to be regulated. Why? And why is the reason? Reason why is because, see, the people who are attempting these extrajudicial killings are police officers. They're under a particular power, as Doug said, because of the separation of power. They are holding an office. They're office bearers of the Indian government, right, or the state government itself. So they have a power and they perform in certain ways. The people who are the victim of these acts are actually not the people who are under the state powers, right? And when we talk about, as Shrestha said, that already we all need to that there is certain kind of the people need to put up their points as to whether it is to be decided by the judiciary that whether he was a criminal or he was not a criminal at the very last, right? Before that, nobody is in particular a judge to actually decide whether that person was a criminal or not. But then again,
I have a question.
Just a second, I shall take it. But yeah, in certain cases, even extrajudicial killing has been justified by the Supreme Court or by the state high courts at times, where it has been seen or it has been observed by the court that the life of the police officers going on and arresting these people, or the police officers face such kind of situation where under the umbrella of self-defense, that was the only thing left to do with them is to kill that person, all right? So that also does not count under the umbrella of extrajudicial killing, or that is justified extrajudicial killing at per se, is my thought. Yes, Josh.
So, where do you factorize morality in this whole debate?
I don't
when it comes to
No, I don't factorize morality much into this whole debate. The
Let us
reason,
understand how morality pans out in the context of law. We need to understand, and this is a very general misconception, the judiciary does not judge per se. The judiciary is presented with facts, with a background of what is prevalent in the society, and then the judiciary, based on those facts and understanding of those facts, tells us what would be the most viable way of going about things, right? So when we
Now,
talk about
okay,
morality,
so what if
morality is embedded in law. Public morality or a sense of morality is embedded in law. But when the law itself is in question, we need to question the morality of that law itself. So when we talk about morality of extrajudicial killings, we need to understand that provisions have been provided to them, and rule of law is not being, and we are not going against rule of law. Why? Because rule of law does not state that law in itself it comes above everything. It states that everybody is accountable to law. Because if we say that the law is the umbrella or has the upper hand, that would not be correct, because that would be a very positive view of law, which, as we have seen, has been criticized and is not prevalent in our current society. That is why we need to understand that law in itself invites this morality from what is being presented in front of the judiciary or in front of law, based on the changing dynamics of the society. And this is how morality pans out. So when we talk about morality of extrajudicial killings, they're not immoral because they have been provided provisions. Section 100, Section 300 of IPC, Section 43 of CRPC, a policeman has the power to transgress the idea of a person's right to liberty and life, if the need comes.
No, but you see, the problem where that arises is when you tell me how morality really pans out in a particular society. Morality does not pan out of popular opinion or hero worshipping like you actually portray it here. Morality is something like a, because then the whole idea of morality becomes very subjective. And when a morality cannot stand the test of subjectivity, how would you really apply it in a such a vast society, be it any society for that matter? Let's talk about India, or let's talk about any other country for that matter. It's a vast culture, it's a vast society. In a vast society, you can't really talk about morality panning out of the popular opinion, or just out of worshipping just because this happens to be a popular opinion. That's not morality. Rather, actually dwells into the basic depravity that humans are supposed to adhere to. We talk about certain standards and certain principles that, in no matter and in no format, are supposed to be surpassed, are supposed to be, and that's why we talk about rule of law in the first place, isn't it? We talk about rule of law, and we say that rule of law really prevails not just in the constitution, but it's supposed to prevail throughout the country in any other legislature as well, because of the very reason that we are a democratic country where we say that rule of law prevails over rule by law instead. Right. We say rule of law because it's the rule that will be prevailing, which has been set up by the law and not by the people, and it's not the people who are actually controlling all of these things. That is the reason why Daksh actually comes here and says that there is a separation of power, and that's where I think that even morality supports the whole idea that because there is rule of law, and because there is a, because we know that we're not governed by the rules that have been set by the law, but instead it's the law which sets the rules, and we are governed by those rules. It's not the people who are governing us, it's not the people or a person who's ruling us. That's the reason why we say that our rights can actually be protected. That's the reason why, even as a criminal, I know there's a basic right that I have that needs to be protected. So even if there are certain loopholes with regards to the judiciary, or with regards to the executive, or with regards to the legislative, the point is that there are problems in every single sector that you look at. But does that mean?
Pandey, I'll interrupt you in between because I have to put forth what the topic of today actually was. It says, are extrajudicial killings sanctioned by the government? So let's deal with that thing first. In my opinion, I believe that they are not sanctioned by the government, because I think it would be a completely negative approach towards how the society would be formulated if such things are sanctioned in the first place by the government. I don't think it's sanctioned, but it's something that cannot have. So, for example, other incidents is the categorization of all these so-called extrajudicial killings by the police. Now these extra other incidents in totality categorize all the people who die in any event of police killing, in events of encounters, or any bus, or any bus on terrorist organizations and all. So can you actually put forth and say that it is sanctioned by government? Is the question?
So, extrajudicial killing in itself is not the main act. It is an incidental act which happens while pursuance of the arrest of a particular person or getting custody of an alleged criminal. It is not the act in itself, but a provision that has been sanctioned by the government through various sections, through various institutions such as NHRC, which make sure that this is implemented in a way that does not transgress human rights. You can also say it is sanctioned in a way that after an extrajudicial killing has taken place, FIRs can be made. The magistrate can investigate into it. So we need to understand that rule of law is not being transgressed because everybody is held accountable for whatever act they have done.
But then again, there's one another thing very important you need to understand over here. We need to see over here is, we need to observe is that at times a number of controversial people who are involved in these things, right? Number of controversial people who may after arrest and get represented in front of this judiciary itself may lead up to a number of problems for the ruling governments or other past governments who were there in the past, right? So what I believe is that at number of times the Dutch asked us in a general on this platform that whether do you think this is sanctioned by government. I believe that not all cases, but I believe that some controversial cases where controversial figures are under the question. Yes, the state government or the governments are actually the sanctioning power. Why? You need to understand one thing. For example, if I am a police officer and I go on and do an extrajudicial killing of Daksh Dhawan under a very controversial case, all right, he might go up and ruin Shrestha Garge's career after 10 days, and she is the ruling party chief minister, for example. Now she knows that if this happens, he might ruin my career, and I know that if I kill Daksh Dhawan, I will ruin my own career by the hands of judiciary. Why will I take such a risk if it is not sanctioned by Shrestha? Because if Shrestha is not giving me that protection, is not making me comfortable enough to do such an activity, why will I do? Because knowing that I am a constable or a 2-star sub-inspector, I cannot hold up in front of the judiciary and seek for non-guilty, right? That is what I also believe.
So even though, if we consider
Daksha, for you, there is a question. There have been numerous cases and a new case every day. The court stands to provide justice, but there are a lot of procedures to it, killing a lot of time. Here the question is about justice, not power. Example, the Nirbhaya case, justice after 7 years. Ayushi Gupta asks, is this justice or a game of Jumanji?
Can I just say one thing? That the justice was delivered earlier. It was just the delay in the process of law. That the appeals, that all these things, that was the process of law which led to these things. There was no delay.
I think it's the trickery of the defense is what I would say. That
yeah, exactly.
And this is a very misplaced premise. If you are taking this premise, how justice is being done, this is a very problematic premise because you cannot judge it on this basis.
Yeah.
The process is required. What we are debating upon is whether the process of extrajudicial killing in itself
That is what I said in my first speech, that whether it is the process established by law which actually becomes a loophole for such accused or such people who have committed such crimes and they try to escape because of these loopholes. Is this process a loophole? That is also another question.
Sir, I would like to quote, in reference to the question as well that was being asked, I would like to quote Jordan Peterson, who basically said that in order to be able to think, you have to risk offending someone. Now, in this, this quote really hit me that in what all places it can be actually construed. So, in order to be able to think, in order for the police to take an action, they have to risk offending here, which becomes have to risk killing someone in order to find the truth. Now, I would say that all these delay in judicial proceedings and all, it's a mechanism which has been provided by the law, and I think it's the trickery, and I would say it's a trick by the defense to get it delayed, because the status quo and the premise and all the provisions already have given this power to citizens, so that there can be certain.
Sir, I would like to cut you off and ask Shivam sir, the same question, because the ambit of the question essentially was that this is a question from a normal person, a person who has not had research in this matter. The person's heart lies in the place that sometimes the justice is so delayed that the people often think that maybe if there was an element of extrajudicial killing, the people would have been much happier, the justice would have been more fair. I would like to ask Shivam sir what he thinks about this chain of thought.
Well, very good question, Manmeet. Whoever has asked that question, good question. I'd rather expect you to that, try and understand the real definition of justice. If you really think that this is where you get justice from, because speedily people, popular people, like a population, say 10 people, 40 people, or say a majority of people are asking a particular criminal to be put on the hook or to be done away with, or whatever is the punishment needs to be given. Is that really justice? And if that person gets killed by an extrajudicial method, by an extrajudicial pathway, is that really justice to that person? Because even if I am not able to, I fail as a person, I fail to protect the right of this one particular person, even if that person is a criminal, a menace for the entire society. But the fact remains that the human rights, the basic depravity of human beings, which I say, the basic principles, if I am not able to protect the basic rights of even this criminal, I have failed in justice on my part. I have failed that fairness that was supposed to be there. Because basically justice is nothing but a balance of interests that we needs to come into picture. That is all there is in justice. Eventually, justice and fairness are two different things. Justice and equity are again different things. But when we talk about justice, just the word justice, and if you're saying that justice needs to be come out of judiciary, that is the job that you need to balance the interests of the two stakeholders. On one side, that particular criminal, on the other side, that entire society which says that this particular criminal is a menace. In such cases, the best way to balance.
Shivam, the exact point that needs to be answered over here is, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line of balance of interest? When would you actually say in what? Okay, according to the paradigm that you're building right now, according to you, when is it actually valid for police to get involved with extrajudicial killing? When can you actually say that okay, it can be allowed? And what?
Right. That's where I said it's from the very beginning. I said that if there is an extrajudicial killing happening, I from my side can never justify it in whatever reasoning I try to put it. I will never be able to justify it because I don't think it's justifiable. If you're trying to say that this is justifiable, I think that we're overlooking a systematic failure, and we're trying to justify that systematic failure.
But the law itself allows all these kind of things that come up. As Krishna said, under Section 100 of the IPC and all these things,
No,
right?
of course not.
All the exception free of Section 300.
Of course not. Self-defense is under Section 96 of the IPC. Section 96 of the IPC says that the person has the right to private defense. Now, nowhere does private defense say that you have to actually find out a criminal and then actually kill that criminal because you have a private defense. If a person is coming under the ambit of a private defense, that's where the law says that that particular person has a right to present themselves, to present the defense that it was a private defense, that it was in my own private, in order to, because there was an apprehension of danger to my life, is why I had to take such an extreme step. That's where the extent of this particular Section 96 of IPC ends. It's just a defense. It's not a right. It's not a right that can be given to the government or to the police for that matter. Yes, police gets the right under Section 46 of CRPC, which says that in order to make an arrest, a police can actually go to the extent of taking someone's life. But that's again only when there is an apprehension of danger again. That's how these particular sections are always construed, and they'll continue to be construed in the same manner.
Officer to calculate at a particular point of time, to calculate the apprehension of threat, first to calculate that will I die from this particular location or not? Is this particular distance is feasible enough to kill me at the ferry?
Yeah, they call that calculation to be instincts.
So that calculation of the instincts is what a person to do in defense, right? And you won't tell him, okay, try shooting
So
me. If I
again,
die, it's all right.
what
I'll
I'm
try
saying
shooting.
is,
So, okay, let
what
us
I'm saying
understand the
is
premise
that
in which
there is
this
a difference
opinion.
between a defense and a right, right?
Panelists, excuse me. There's a question directed towards Shrestha ma'am.
I would like
And
to answer this premise first, and then I'll take that question because we need to
sure, it
understand
is
that
directed to you and Rohan sir. So
okay.
I want you both to answer that question, and then there's a question directed to Shivam sir. So this will be the order. Please continue.
Okay, what we need to understand that the premise that has been put forth by Shivam sir and the premise from which the question itself comes is based on public opinion on how the society in general has started perceiving extrajudicial killings. We need to understand that this opinion is not based on all cases of extrajudicial killings, but glorified cases like that of Vikas Dubey. That comes in the limelight
I agree.
and forms the basis of what the society thinks of these extrajudicial killings. When I say that, when I talked about morality with respect to extrajudicial killings, I was basing it on the statistics that there has been an increasing number of extrajudicial killings in all states, especially states like Uttar Pradesh, where the sense of accountability of police officers is lessened due to the loopholes of how the system functions. We need to understand that you need to account for all these 5,000 cases of extrajudicial killings if you are justifying it on the basis of justice. We need to understand that if an extrajudicial killing is taking place, the decision to kill that criminal or alleged criminal should not have been taken prior to that extrajudicial killing, but should be taken in the moment because the provisions or sanctions that have been provided by the government are based on those instinctive problems that occur while you are arresting a person. So we need to understand that this cannot be a question or an
We
ambit
have taken your
for
point, ma'am.
justice.
We have taken your point, ma'am. The question directed to you and Rohan sir, which I prefer that Rohan sir answers first, is that the sole evidence it is possible to produce that anything is desirable is that people actually do desire it, but when we have a law and people taking someone's life without being declared guilty is undesirable. So, on the basis of metaphysics of morality, don't you think that the extrajudicial killing is a system against the morality and it is taking us back to the state of nature and is a hindrance to Kant's conception of freedom and freedom of an individual?
I would like to answer after Rohan sir is complete.
But can I switch to Hindi, please? Maybe I'm not very much. The people
Sure,
not.
Sure,
But I'd like to comment on that. How this person, whoever has asked that question, Kumar Rishabh, great job. How you got the Kant's concept of freedom. You're absolutely right in this. But go ahead, you guys answer the question.